Soon, as they traveled, other cars joined the convoy, and the journey took 7 days for a journey which would normally have taken 1. Because at every township on the way, people stopped the convoy and gathered to pay respects. And the procession had to stop each time. Eldoret was one of the places the convoy broke journey. There, the urn was taken to the house of Satish Gautama, our very respected senior advocate who passed away very, very recently. There, the urn was kept overnight for an all-night vigil. Upon finally reaching Kampala, there was again a formal ceremony of homage, attended also by the then governor of of Uganda. The ashes were then taken to Jinja on the 15th of August 1948, which was the first anniversary, of course, of India's independence. Before a huge crowd gathered on the riverbank, the ashes of Mahatma Gandhi were immersed in the sources of the River Nile. The honor of immersing the ashes in the Nile was given to Ram Vilas Sirdar, a highly respected social worker of great integrity. Not to one of the great Sethias of Uganda commerce, but to this social worker and the test for selecting him was his long-time integrity and service to the community. And Ram Vilas Sirdar was the father of Mrs. Sushila Gautama, that is Mrs. Satish Gautama. And so this paper that I read to you, I dedicate tonight to Satish Gautama and the work that he and his family had done and have done over the period of a long period of time. That initiative was not from lawyers, it didn't come from politicians, it came from 2 merchants. One from South Africa, Sorabji Rustamji, and the other from Kenya, that was Jamshed Beramji. And you will forgive a tiny minority claiming a little bit of ethnic chauvinism to say that they were both Parsis. Thank you. Thank you. Let me turn to the third example. In 1923, there was an issue arose of satyagraha in Kenya in respect of the opposition by Indians to the new poll tax law that had been set out. The movement against tax was begun in January of 1923. About 25 protesters, and mostly merchants, and I'll tell you where I get the word from, had already been charged for non-payment and sentenced to terms of imprisonment. That is a quotation from Gandhi's Young India at the issue of 1925, one of the issues of 1925. A resolution had been tabled in Congress and passed to reject the poll tax which had been imposed on Indians. Following on this resolution, which was passed overwhelmingly, it was decided to organize a satyagraha against the poll tax law. And to that end, M.A. Desai, Manilal Desai, the foremost political leader in Kenya, traveled to India for support. Again, now I quote from Young India. This is the report. The local Indian leaders had thought of starting this satyagraha movement as a form of direct action against the Kenya government decision. Mr. M.A. Desai, the Indian leader in Kenya, put this idea before a meeting of the Indian National Congress Working Committee held at Sabarmati in the end of November 23. The committee seemed to be quite skeptical about the advisability of starting such a movement, and Mr. Rajagopalachari, CR, cross-examined Mr. Desai at length about the number of people that would be involved, the probable amount of suffering they would have to undergo, the morale of the Indians in Kenya, and similar points. Mr. Desai placed before the working committee the information that he had and wanted advice from them. The committee definitely refused to give any advice on this point and decided instead to send one of their representatives to Kenya to attend the East African Congress and study the situation. And that the person they sent was Mrs. Sarojini Naidu, the famous poet and leader. And that is how she came to be the president of the East African Indian National Congress in the following year. But there were others in the committee who questioned not advising M.A. Desai, and they said, "Our people in Kenya want some workers. Shall we refuse them this help? Our workers will find a lot of work to do. They need not assume leadership. They should study and watch the struggle in Kenya, and if necessary, help the local leaders in organizing the people for the next phase of the struggle." Gandhi continues the report, quote, "The Kenya Indians are continuing their brave fight in the face of heavy odds. Messrs. Ghulam Hussain Aladina, Ahmad Bhai Karim, Wali Bhai Ismail, and Qasim Nur Muhammad, together with many others, are already in jail. And now comes the news that Mr. Desai too shares the same honors. The Kenya Indians deserve congratulations for sustaining the fight. You will observe that the fight was being carried on by those merchants who had refused to pay the poll tax. There is the private sector has the means, the opportunity, the experience, and most of all, the judgment to effect change. And most of all, again, there is a welcome waiting for you in national affairs, because it is seen that you come with little self-interest in the political arena, but with a great commitment to this nation. And because entrenching the changes and reforms in the Constitution is a national desire, to consolidate this change is part of the Gandhian tradition. It is part of the Kenyan tradition. Our Constitution seeks political, economic, and social justice. The preamble, Article 10, and the Bill of Rights all expressly set this out. And this participation in effecting social change from the private sector is part of a long and true Kenyan tradition. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Firoz Nauroji for this very informative and valuable message for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I know and I share your anticipation for the real speaker of today, and it is truly my privilege to introduce and welcome Professor Venerable Samdhong Rinpoche, who has kindly made time within an international schedule to come to be with us today. He has been long in Tibetan affairs since 1959 and has been part of the great struggle and has been a great educationist. He's been, until recently, the Prime Minister of the Central Tibetan Administration, or the Tibetan government in exile. He is now a Tibetan refugee of a status that we so highly respect. He is regarded as one of the leading Tibetan scholars of Buddhism. He is also an authority on the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. In the cause that he stands, he has been a participant with a determined choice of method and comes to us as an exponent of nonviolence, both in action, in practice, and in thought. Sir, we say to you, there can be no defeat in the cause that you stand for, because, as Gandhi said, there can be no defeat for Satyagraha. And that, for us, is for all struggles that are just, there is no defeat. Please welcome Samdhong Rinpoche.
You're comfortable standing? Yes, yes. Please. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sambuddhassa. Namo ratnatriyaya namo Avalokiteshwarya. Honorable Chairperson, honorable distinguished guests, sisters and brothers, I am beholden to given this opportunity to be with you in the occasion of commemorating the Gandhi Jayanti as World Non-Violence Day. I am grateful to Asian Foundation and its functionaries for inviting me and make it possible for me to be with you in the great occasion. But at the outset, I must apologize to all of you that I am not a fit person to be speaker on this great occasion, due to several reasons. The first reason is I have no adequate knowledge of English language through which I could communicate my thoughts inappropriately. Secondly, I have been for the last a month just touring around, so I could not prepare any written presentation which could be presented here. In spite of that, I choose to be here just to say a few words, whatever it comes to my mind at this moment of time. If the people in the audience have come with high expectations, that I might have something to communicate to you, then you must be disappointed at the end of the day. Particularly after the beautiful, eloquent presentation of the former speaker, then my speaking would be absolutely unmatched. So whatsoever, since I committed to be a speaker this afternoon, I have to try my best to say a few words what come to my mind at this moment. To commemorate Gandhi Jayanti as International Non-Violence Day is, I think, a very appropriate initiative which we must be appreciated. Sometimes people or organizations do take right decision accidentally or knowingly or unknowingly. I think declaration of this day as International Non-Violence Day is also one of the right decision taken unknowingly or accidentally. So I appreciate it. Why? Why Gandhi should be considered as a proponent or authority of non-violence? The teaching of non-violence is so ancient. In India, several thousand years ago, the Vedic tradition, the Sanatak Dharma tradition, and 2,500 years ago, the Tathagat Samyak Sambuddha, Bhagwan Mahavir, all of these great saints and sages, their teaching was of non-violence. Particularly Buddhism and Jainism, their central philosophy is of non-violence. The great Acharya Aryadev have said in his Chaturashatak that if someone asks me to summarize entire Buddha's teaching into 2 words, I would choose the word of non-violence. And that conveys the entirety of the Buddha's teaching. Apart from that, the Sangha yogas, and many other traditions, all of them equally talk about non-violence, peace, tranquility, and all these. But until Gandhi did his experiment with truth, none of these teachers have taught us how to imply non-violent action in the worldly affairs, in the household, in the politics, in the national struggle for management of state or a rebuilding of nation. The non-violence was considered to be a teaching which is to be practiced in a spiritual persuasion alone. And when you come to the worldly affairs, certain degree of violence is considered to be indispensable, particularly in the issues of state or issues of governance of a nation. Not a single Buddhist nation was able to practice the Buddha's teaching in their political and social management. In this world, there are many Buddhist nations, such as Myanmar, Siam, the Thailand, the Sri Lanka, the Tibet, the Mongolian, the Bhutan. All of these consider themselves as Buddhist nations from ancient time till now. But none of these Buddhist nations were able to do away with their military force, police force. And in the name of protection of Dharma, or in the name of protection of the Buddha image and so on and so forth, a great deal of wars and killings and bloodsheds have taken place, which are completely against the teaching of the Buddha. And no one was able to reconcile their action with the Buddha Dharma or the Buddha's teaching. For the first time in this world, the person known as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, later on Gurudev Rabindranath has called him as Mahatma, rightly called him as Mahatma, have given the insight in all spheres of human conduct. It may be struggling for social justice, it may be a defense of nation, it may be a political struggle, wherever, whatever unnecessary objects to be achieved, which is just and which is based on truth, can be achieved and can be managed through non-violence. It's therefore we respect Gandhi so highly and so dearly due to this new insight. For example, for ourselves, the Tibet struggle could not free from all kind of violence until 1967. After learning from Gandhi's teaching, we realized that to continue a just cause never need a violence. On the contrary, non-violence is much more effective than any kind of violence. Unequal violence fight is no many. So therefore, we consider that Gandhi's experiment and application of truth and non-violence is encompass all the previous teachings of non-violence in the sphere of spiritual field. Thus, the Gandhi's birthday is to be observed as non-violence day is absolutely appropriate and a right decision taken by the Committee of Nations. Now, what we should ponder upon on this day, 64 years passed after Gandhi's death, and during which period a great deal of change has taken place on this earth. Gandhi's teachings were almost completely forgotten and neglected, including his own birthplace, and perhaps almost every decision maker or political leadership have considered Gandhi's methods are impracticable. The violence is increased rampantly on this earth. Now, the question bothering to my mind is why we get together and celebrate the Non-Violence Day. Do we really have an intention to lead a non-violent life? Therefore, we respect to Gandhi and we get together to celebrate his Jayanti and talk about non-violence, or it is just a lip service and a kind of ritual which is to be performed. And then when we go back, we lead a continuing violent way of living, then I think it's better not talk about non-violence and not talk about Gandhi. The violence today, the direct violence, the indirect violence, the structural violence, particularly the kind of economic violence through exploitation is a pervasive all over our day in, day out life. Violence is become a kind of breathing in and breathing out in our living system. In the past, in the ancient days, violence is for specific purpose, taking place for a specific purpose, either to take revenge or either for food or clothing, or to enlarge territorial, or to get power or something like that. And then that object is achieved, the violence comes to an end temporarily. Of course, each violence sows a seed of counter-violence that will come later on, but for a time being, the violence can be come to an end and stopped or postponed for some time. But today, the violence become a trade. The violence become a market. So no one is willing to put an end to the violence. The wars, the terrorism, the internal conflict or the external conflict, wherever we look around, these are the only market for the weapon industry. Weapon industry need a perpetuate market and very quick consuming market, and for that the violence is the only way to consume these productions. So how we shall encounter this kind of violence, which is considered to be one of the most profitable and best trade available